Well, greetings to everybody, and good to see you, Trevor.
Good to see you, Bill. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well. How are things? Are you in Florida today?
Yes, in sunny Florida, on the coast. If you're going to be locked down anywhere, it's not such a bad place to be.
Well, praise the Lord.
Thank
Trevor,
you.
we're glad to have you with us here today, and it's a great privilege and honor whenever we have the opportunity, even if it's just to hear you here or there. And certainly, you are a great gift to this country. And listening to Frank Gaffney recently, he calls you a national treasure. And those of us that have been aware of you for these years, we just thank you for what you're doing in our country.
Well, thank you very much. We sort of owe you guys something from World War II, I think, so for saving us then. So if I can repay a little bit of that debt, that's good.
You're off to an awful good start. I'd like to start with a word of prayer like we ordinarily do, Trevor. Let's bow our heads. Father, we again thank you for the privilege of having Trevor with us. We pray especially a blessing upon him and his family and in his work across this country. Father, continue to give them health and well-being and protection, Father, and the wisdom and the desire to be truth tellers as they are. And we just thank you now for this time to be with him and for all that are a part of this call today. Thank you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Well, Trevor, let's get right down to it. A couple of days ago, I heard you on Frank Gaffney for the full hour, and you were speaking about Antifa and also a great deal about Black Lives Matter. And one of my great concerns is that there's just an awful lot of ignorance in relationship to both of these movements, these communist movements, and particularly I want to center on Black Lives Matter this afternoon. And so let's go ahead and begin with that. And I wanted to just say, I wanted to start with this question. You've been warning Americans in our country that we had enemies within and without for quite a while. What were you seeing, and when did you begin to see that the engagement of the enemies without and within in years past? When did that begin to happen?
Well, look, this has been ongoing since before the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, but I would say it took off in the 70s. The Vietnam War era was a big deal, and what really set the stage for today was in 1975 with the Church Commission. That was Senator Frank Church, an extreme left-wing Democrat from Idaho, held hearings that basically gutted the US intelligence community. And since that time, the FBI has pretty much ignored, communist infiltration, radicalism. They will concentrate on fraud or crime or terrorists who actually blow things up. But if you're a radical plotting to overthrow the United States, they ignore you. And which is why the president and most of the news media and most of the government is flying completely blind today. They have no one to give them the intelligence that they need. And so a revolution is unfolding, and most of our leadership doesn't realize it's a revolution, or doesn't seem to. But it really got underway under Obama because he was feeding money to these people and allowing foreigners to work with them. But the real new phase, the minute that Trump got elected, or even before Trump got elected, but the minute Trump got elected, they set out to make this country ungovernable. And they especially were going to concentrate on this year because it's election year, and they want to make sure that this is nothing to do with racism. This is about destroying Trump. Let that be very, very clear. The U.S. economy and Trump.
Trevor, I know you know Diana Westner, very familiar with her,
Yeah.
American Betrayal, and one of the things that she oftentimes states and talks about is the work and the labors of Senator Joseph McCarthy back in the day, and how he was trying to expose the major communist influence in the American government back in that day, And she said in a recent broadcast that he was really, really popular, well liked. And then he
Mm.
began to expose the enemy. And now, of course, we've heard for so many years McCarthyism, that he's the really, you don't want to lie, you don't want to be a McCarthyite. And so that has really been, that has been a factor for a long, long time, hasn't it? She made the comments even yesterday that anybody that dares to speak up, even like you're doing, is basically ultimately vilified and marginalized at the best.
Yeah, look, words are the leftists' biggest weapons. You know, racism, Islamophobia, homophobia, McCarthyist. Look, the word McCarthy, the phrase McCarthy came out of the Daily Worker, the Communist Party newspaper. They came up with that. It was a weapon to demonize anybody who exposed what they were doing. Look, I went to McCarthy's grave in Appleton, Wisconsin. I got my photograph taken at his grave. I'm proud to be associated with McCarthy. I had a friend in New Zealand who was a former Australian communist who left the party, became a conservative. But he was active in the Australian Communist Party during the so-called McCarthy era. And I said, what did you communists think of him, McCarthy? His name was Jeff McDonald. I said, what did the communists think of McCarthy, Jeff? And he said, oh, we were, I won't use the bad word that he said, but it was an Australian. Yeah. We were terrified of him. We were horrified with what he was doing, but the only thing is, he didn't go anywhere near far enough. So the communist infiltration has never been rooted out of the State Department. It's never been rooted out of the Justice Department or any of the other major government departments. It's always been there, but with the 70s and 80s, you get these, the SDS types, the young radicals from that time. They are now in the top levels of government departments. They are now running Hollywood. They are now running major newspapers. So this communist movement that's always been there, was never rooted out, is now running most of America's institutions. They may not be in the Communist Party, but they were former Maoists, former Trotskyists, former Communist Party members, and they still want their revolution before they die. So while we have these people rampaging on the streets, you've got all the people running big corporations, government departments, all covering for them, all buying into it. So, you've got Republicans like Nikki Haley coming out and saying, 400 years of, racial oppression in America. When a Republican like that, who wants to be the president someday, is mouthing Maoist communist talking points, you know that the Cultural Revolution is very well progressed in this country.
And Trevor, right along with that, the many years that we've had a great deal of difficulty from the standpoint of leadership at the highest levels, but not only at the highest levels, but even on college campuses when there have been riots or there has been a protest of some magnitude, even back in the 60s and the 70s at college campuses, administration would just allow the protesters to come and take the buildings over. And that's what's greatly concerning, I think, to many of us today, is because we're looking, in Washington State and Minnesota and elsewhere, and we're seeing this very same thing happen. And we're looking to see, will somebody stand someplace somehow? Please, we're just so anxious and needy for justice, righteous justice, enforcing the constitutional law.
Absolutely. Well, by the way, Eric Holder was one of those university occupiers, a former Attorney General, Eric Holder. So you can understand whose side he was on. But that's right. Look, see, in the 60s and the 70s, when Reagan was governor of California, for instance, he would take a hard line on these people. He would arrest them. They'll be put in jail. They'll be put on trial for the crimes that had been committed. But now they don't even get a slap on the wrist. And in many parts of the country, you have left-wing attorney generals. Like in Minnesota, Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota, is a communist, is an Islamist radical. He's on the side of these people. Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, is a Marxist. So are both of the senators, including Amy Klobuchar. She is a Marxist. Mrs. Nice, moderate Minnesota, is a Marxist. So they're trying to turn Minnesota into a new Mogadishu. They're trying to turn Minnesota into a communist state within America. They're trying to do the same to Seattle. They're trying to do it to Washington and other places, and through various parts of the South as well. And you obviously know what they've done to Detroit, but and Dearborn and all these areas. This is Marxists come in there and they open the doors to the Islamists to set up a counter state. So this is Maoist. Mao's idea was you set up a counter state. You take over areas and this becomes the opposition state to the real state. And you build your power and you join up with other counter states until the real state is lost its power and can be overthrown. So President Trump needs to be taking federal action here because the states cannot be relied on to do it themselves. These Democrat blue states are on the side of the insurrectionists. Their governors like Gretchen Whitmer and others, they support the protesters. They support the revolutionaries. So this can only be done at a federal level. For instance, one way to stop a lot of this very quickly, which was used to stop the Vietnam protests, it is a felony in America to cross state lines to participate in a riot. Well, if that law was applied and all these Antifa people had been jailed in 2017, all these Black Lives Matter people had been jailed, they brought 10,000 people into Ferguson, Missouri in 2014 from out of state. Had resolute action been taken then, we wouldn't be seeing this situation now. So now, at the 11th hour, the president at a federal level has to actually start applying federal law against these people and break the back of the movement really, really quickly. Because we're in for a summer of this. This is not finished. They're calling it the summer of freedom. This is going to be an ongoing process till either the government collapses or the election occurs and Joe Biden gets elected. You know, that's the goal.
And Trevor, when we think of the president and we see the many stands that he's already taken, and we also increasingly recognize the fact that the deep state is far greater than what most of us probably could ever imagine, we wonder how many people in his cabinet and with his inner circle will stand with him. Is that what's holding him back? Because he is saying, you know, if this state government doesn't deal, we will. New York, for example, Washington, for example. What is holding him back, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, look, I think there's a couple of things. I think, A, he doesn't fully comprehend the gravity of the situation and the interconnectedness. He sort of sees, and this is what I'm told by people, that he sort of sees all these people attacking him from everywhere, but he doesn't actually understand the cohesion. That this is all orchestrated to bring him down, bring the US economy down, and bring him down. And he doesn't trust a lot of people, you know, like he can issue an order and it'll just get ignored, you know, down the chain. It just gets, you know, the people in the Justice Department just stall, they just obfuscate, they just do whatever they want. The big mistake Trump made, and like he's a businessman, he comes into an organization, he thinks, I'm going to give the orders and things are going to get done. That's how business works. But he came into the government and he didn't fire the heads. He didn't put his people, because he just thought, well, even if they are Obama people, they're going to follow the law, aren't they? They're going to follow my orders. No. And so he's still getting on top of that. He's still got this big bureaucracy that hates him and is trying to obfuscate against him. So there's partly, I think he thinks it might go away. I think he doesn't. He lacks a little bit of the confidence that the bureaucracy will do it, and he's got people in his own party who won't stand with him. You saw his own Secretary of Defence criticise him. You see, well, Colin Powell's not really in his own party, but you've still got people in his own party that I'm sure would stand, like the Mitt Romneys of the world. So what he needs is a lot more pressure from us, the grassroots, to know that the people are behind him, and he really does need to take resolute action. I don't think he quite realizes the gravity yet. I think he's still coming to terms with this, still formulating his plans, and he is not getting the intelligence he needs because the FBI, A, doesn't have it, and B, if they did, they wouldn't pass it on to him, most likely, because he has got to decapitate the top leadership of the FBI, the Justice Department, all these organizations. They're all controlled by the bad guys. They support the revolutionaries.
Trevor, what is your view on Attorney General William Barr? You know, we know he's highly regarded in many ways, but at the same time, it seems as though it's difficult for him just to be strongly and very effectively rhetorical. Yet we're still waiting for the hammer to come down.
Yeah, and we waited 2 years for Sessions to bring the hammer down too, and it never happened. Sessions, who I had a lot of regard for, I thought was one of the best senators. I thought, he'll be great in justice, but he wasn't. And Barr, I think, is better, but Barr, I don't think has the information either. And Barr probably cannot trust his own Justice Department. Look, we know all through the country, protesters are being arrested, and then the Attorney Generals just let them out on the streets again. And so the government must know this, but they're thinking, what are we going to do about it? I don't think they've got a formulated plan yet. And Barr, I think is good, but he's got to be a lot tougher. And I think the president, he came out with the Bible, he made that statement at the church, and that was fantastic. And he talked tough, but we haven't really seen a lot of action since. And that's what people are waiting for. People are freaking out. They're going to lose their country. They see all these horrible things happening, and they don't see any punishment or accountability for these thugs that are running rampant. And we're crying out for the leadership, and we're just not seeing it yet. And people are going to lose faith in the presidency if this continues much longer.
It is very concerning. And Trevor, getting now into the Black Lives Matter a bit, it's incredible to see how strong the Black Lives Matter has become even in recent weeks and recent months. And we hear of those that have loved ones or family friends or whatever that are aligning with the Black Lives Matter. And so help to give all that you understand about Black Lives Matter, their origin and who their affiliations are. That will be very helpful at this juncture.
Yeah, and just say, this is basically Maoist, and what you see around you, like a professor just got fired in Los Angeles because he wouldn't give black students time off an exam. He wouldn't exempt them from an exam because of the death of George Floyd, This is what you saw in the Cultural Revolution in China, where professors would be persecuted and tied up and beaten. It hasn't got to that stage yet, but it's not far away. You know that your job's at risk. So what we're seeing is basically Maoism. And what Maoism is a variant of communism that A, works to build a counter-state, works to take territory and become a counter-state to the government, but also emphasizes race. Because in communist China, in China before the revolution, there wasn't an industrial working class. So the old class struggle didn't make a lot of sense. But there were a lot of peasants, agricultural workers, there were a lot of racial minorities, and that's what Maoism works on. The old traditional communism says, we're the working class, you're the boss's class, we're going to overthrow you. Now it's, we are the oppressed minorities, you are white Christian capitalism, we are going to overthrow you. That's the new communist paradigm. Okay. So, and that's where critical race theory comes from, which is now in the Baptist church. It's all over. That's the idea. If you're white, you're automatically a racist. If you're black, you can't be a racist, because racism is only for the people who have power. So to destroy racism, you have to destroy the white Christian capitalist patriarchy. So we are the new capitalists, right? We're the 1% that has to be overthrown. So Black Lives Matter, there's two groups behind the rioting, two main groups. There's the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and Liberation Road, both pro-Chinese communist groups. They were once part of the same organization, but they split in 1998, and they both kept the same name, which was very confusing. But one of them is now named itself Liberation Road, and this is the group behind Black Lives Matter. So in 2012, the Trayvon Martin was killed in Florida by George Zimmerman, and so these three women, Lisa Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi, were just sitting around one day, and they're really concerned about all these young black boys being hunted down and murdered by police and, white racism. And they started this hashtag, Black Lives Matter, and it spread everywhere. Well, that's the legend. The truth is this: those three women were all hardcore Marxist-Leninists involved with the Liberation Road faction of Freedom Road. One of them had been trained by a former weatherman, Weather Underground. Two of them had links with former East German communists. All three of them are Marxists, and immediately they put it out there. All of their Maoist friends and organizations just tweeted it like crazy. They created the movement. It was completely a concoction. So then Ferguson happened in 2014, and that was days and days of rioting. Well, that was all run by a group called the Organization of Black Struggle, which is a front for Freedom Road Socialist Organization run by a longtime Maoist called Jamala Rogers. And as I said before, they boast about this. They brought over 10,000 people into Ferguson from out of state, because these people control unions, they control social movement, they control churches, and they have a lot of money from the Ford Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, some of the Soros organizations, Democracy Alliance. They got all the money in the world. Google just gave $37 million to anti-racism groups. So they did Ferguson. Then they set up a group called Movement for Black Lives. And that's the umbrella group for all the Black Lives Matter groups from around the country. Black Visions Alliance in Minnesota, Black Lives Matter, Louisville, Kentucky, Dream Defenders in Florida, whatever. They're all linked through this umbrella group. And so this is half of the movement. This is one half of it. So they are doing conference calls now. You can go and watch them. They have 230,000 views. And what they're doing is coordinating all these Black Lives Matter groups all around the country to create protests. Now, these Black Lives Matter people, they've had 2 delegations to Palestine to meet with communists in Palestine. The people who did the Intifada. One of them, they took a guy from Florida who was the son of a leading advisor to Yasser Arafat, the former head of the PLO, a terrorist organization. These guys are linked to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a Marxist-Leninist group on the State Department terror list. But they are going over there and linking up, and they are coordinating half of the problems around the country. But the other Freedom Road Socialist Organization, which is also pro-China, are doing the other half. And they're the ones who ran the riots in Minneapolis, because that's their headquarters. but they set up a group in 2014, just last year, called the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, NAPRA. And that was named after the same group set up by the Communist Party USA in 1972, headed by Angela Davis, you know, the famous communist with the afro. And they've reincarnated that organization, headed by a man called Frank Chapman, a former Communist Party member, a convicted killer, and a leader of the first NAPRA. Now he sits on the Central Committee of Freedom Road Socialist Organization. So they got 1,200 people together in Chicago last year. They got groups all over the country, and they are running the other half of the protest movement. So this is all pro-Chinese communists running this. So do you think China would like to see America burn and Trump not get re-elected? These people follow the Chinese line on everything. They have celebrations for Mao's birthday. They praise China for handling the COVID virus. They defend China from American attack. They are Chinese partisans on your soil, and they are 85% of the protest movement is run by these two groups. This is a Chinese operation.
And Trevor, you also talk about intersectionality. And is that the LGBT and the 57 different genders? Is that explained?
Yeah, look, all that stuff, all this, the intersectionality and the 57 genders and LGBT, that all comes out of the Maoist movement. When you're talking that stuff, when your granddaughter in high school was saying, well, I'm not really sure what gender I am, I could be this and I could be that, and it's very fluid, that's Maoism. That comes out of the Maoist movement, and that's all through our education system now. And so intersectionality means it's not just class, it's race, it's gender, it's every form of oppression are all intersectional. They all interrelate. So if you support the LGBTQ agenda, you should be supporting the anti-racist agenda. You should be supporting the class struggle. You should be supporting the feminist movement and the Puerto Rican sovereignty movement and the Hawaiian sovereignty movement and La Raza and the reparations for Japanese Americans and reparations for blacks. It's all intersected as part of the one movement. So people who say there's no communism in America these days, it's like a fish telling you there's no water in the sea. You're swimming in it. We are living in a Marxist, Maoist culture. It's all around us. The LGBTQ movement, the environmental movement, the Women's March on Washington, you know, where 1 million women with stupid hats marched the day after Trump got inaugurated, all run by the Communist Party USA and Liberation Road. And I guarantee 98% of the women who marched had no idea it was a communist operation. You know, Black Lives Matter is communist. The LGBTQ movement is communist. The environmental movement is communist. You know?
And whether they realize it or not.
Yeah, most of them have. Most of these young kids writing have no idea.
So Trevor,
They've just been told they're oppressed, and this is a way to get back at the white man and rip off some stuff at the same time.
I think I've heard you say that the protest movement itself, it's you know, it can be a varieties of reasons, and just the enthusiasm of they got a break where they're not in school right now, and have some, and so they start to the numbers show up, and then the true the Black Lives Matter folk and Antifa people, they then just jump in and do the overall organizing and delegating.
Yeah, this is 90% useful idiots, 10% of 8% knowing communists, and 2% foreign connected organizers. This is a pyramid, you know, the few in the know at the top and the mass at the bottom who have no idea. You know, Lenin took over Russia with 200 Bolsheviks. No, it might have been 2,000 Bolsheviks. 2,000 Bolsheviks in a country of 130 million at the time led a revolt. Now, you can guarantee 98% of the people who helped him overthrow the Tsar had no clue what they were letting themselves in for. None whatsoever. Same in every other communist revolution. Most people have no clue. You know, when Republicans say, I don't like McCarthyism, or yes, there's been 400 years of racial oppression, yes, I understand why these people are rioting, they are useful idiots. They are just parroting the Maoist line with no comprehension of what is behind it or the implications of their statements. And this is huge in the churches. You know, my good friend Judd Saul, who makes movies with me, his Baptist church in Iowa was out there giving pizzas, delivering pizzas to the Black Lives Matter protesters. So a good Baptist church giving food to communist, red Chinese agitators intent on destroying this country and thinking they were doing God's work.
And then enter, and of course this came before the Black Lives Matters recent rioting new phase, but the coronavirus comes along, and hits and puts us back on our heels. And you know, the big question about, did China intentionally spring this, or was this accidental at the time? You know, I think the general agreement is that they've certainly taken advantage of it, and on it goes. And I'd like to know where you enter in on this, in terms of, have we been had? It's certainly my view that we have been had, and the whole matter of even the masking that began and continues on and on and on. It would just seem as though we have seen there's a lot of sheep out there that mean well, but they're following when they should have removed those masks long ago.
Excellent. I wore my first mask yesterday because I went to the dentist and they forced me to. But other than that, no. You know. Okay, look, this is how it worked. So the Chinese virus was obviously created in a lab. That's been much evidence to that effect. So was it deliberately released or accidentally? Well, it could have been either. But the timing was brilliant for the Chinese Communist Party because it was just after they'd got a caning from Trump on trade. It was just after the elections in Taiwan had gone against the communists, and it was just after Trump had been supporting the riots in Hong Kong. So the Chinese leadership had lost a lot of face, and that's a big thing in China. They were worried, can we stand 4 more years of this crazy guy in the White House? We might have a revolution in our own territory against us if this continues. So we do know that, for instance, in Wuhan every year, they have a massive Chinese New Year celebration. It's like Mardi Gras. And Chinese from all over the world go there for a week and they celebrate. And then they go back to Canada or Australia or America, wherever they came from. Well, the Wuhan authorities asked the Communist Party whether we should shut this down this year to stop the spread of the virus. The Communist Party said no. So thousands of Chinese went there. They all went back to Canada, New York, New Zealand, Australia. It spread everywhere. So at least the Chinese were grossly irresponsible, but I would say whether it was deliberate release or not, they spread it. So the first messages in America was all at the left, was Ocasio-Cortez saying, oh, no, if you don't go to a Chinese restaurant, you're racist. Nancy Pelosi taking people around Chinatown. Look, I'm in Chinatown, showing solidarity with the Chinese. But then the message changed. In April, well, it started changing before this, but on April 2nd, the Chinese Communist Party International Department put out a letter signed by 230 world communist parties, still on their website, right? And there's 4 messages in this letter. Now, this is the International Department. This is the group that tells all the communist parties around the world what to say, what the message is, what the line is. And there was 4 messages in this letter. First, don't blame China. This is not China's fault. Anybody who blames China is a racist. Right, that's number one. Have we seen that happen at all? Second message, China's been leading the world against this. China, we owe China a huge debt of gratitude. They're helping the Italians and they sent ventilators to New York. Wow, look at, wow, that's such heroes. Third message, well, China could handle us because we got socialized healthcare. Look at the mess in America because they don't have socialized healthcare. And fourth message, blame Trump, blame Trump, blame Trump, and blame Trump some more. This was the message. Now, recently on Tucker Carlson, he had a former CIA officer on his program, David somebody, and this guy is a Democrat. And he was saying, look, the Democrats are following the Chinese line on COVID-19. And Tucker said, why? We said some of them are useful idiots, but I got to believe some of them are paid Chinese agents. And I could probably tell you who they are, but we'll maybe later. So now the message switched to panic, panic, shut down. And Fauci, who's very close to the World Health Organization, which is run by a pro-Chinese Ethiopian Maoist, Tedros, started saying, shut down the world, shut down the world. And Trump was in a position, if I don't follow this advice, I'm going to get blamed for every dead grandmother in this country up until the election. He was forced into a corner to shut things down. But what he didn't realize is that the Democrats, he played into their hands because you got the Chinese want the economy shut down and the Democrats want it shut down because they know that if they can destroy the economy, they probably will destroy Trump. So the Chinese and the Democrats are on the same page. And that's why the Democrats are keeping this going as long as they possibly can. And here's a point I think nobody is really talking about, but I think it's the most important of all. The Obama gutted the US military, did huge damage to the military. Trump, to his huge credit, has been trying to rebuild the military because he sees that Russia and China are arming to the teeth. They're getting ready for war. And the only thing that's going to stop them is a strong US military. So he's been arming up. He's been doing the right stuff. But he can only do that on the back of a strong economy. If they sink our economy, that's the end of the military budget. That's the end of America standing up to Russia and China. The whole balance of power will shift in the world away from America to Russia and China. And already 31 Democrats have signed a letter, including two, led by communists, Barbara Lee and Mark Pocan of Wisconsin, signed a letter to the Armed Services Committee demanding big defense budget cuts in the next election and the next budget go around because of the coronavirus. This is a military, political, economic operation to destroy Trump, the US economy, and the US military. This is a survival situation here. That's what it is. And so we're just starting to pull out, right? Just starting to pull out of the COVID thing. A little ray of confidence was coming in, a little ray of hope. People were starting to go back to work. Then bang, 2 weeks of rioting. Is this a coincidence? You'd have to be pretty naive to think this was a coincidence, especially because China is now crying, oh, look at the rioting you've got. You were laughing at us over our rioting in Hong Kong. Wow, your cities are burning. Iran is doing the same thing. They are making huge propaganda of this. But the thing is, if they can destroy Trump and the economy and the military budget, they run the world. Simple as that.
Steve Coggan last week was also speaking about the strategy, of the Black Lives Matter. That this whole thing was pre-planned.
Oh, absolutely pre-planned.
Minnesota was going to be the state with Keith Ellison in there as the Attorney General, and so they're right on target with the plan, and we're not even into the summer yet. I wanted you to speak about our military, the Pentagon, for example. I think one of the things that is increasingly becoming known through individuals like Phil Haney, deceased Phil Haney. We'll have a question about that at the very end as well. And Steve Coughlin, individuals like that what we've known were tremendous military leaders with great success, and yet were purged out. And many of us wondered, why was it that John Guandolo and Phil Haney, Steve Coughlin, individuals like that were not brought into the military, in important positions. But the more that you begin to listen to a person like Steve Coughlin, it seems very clear that the Pentagon has been compromised for a long, long time. That there are LGBT leaning individuals, Maoist apparently individuals there that are just not on board with this president.
Look, absolutely. Do you think the Soviet Union and China, who have infiltrated every other aspect of our society, including the churches, would ignore the military, their most dangerous adversary? You have communists lecturing the War College. You have the head of the Coast Guard Human Resources Department is a Marxist who promotes the LGBTQ stuff right through. The LGBTQ stuff is not designed for human rights. That's designed to degrade the effectiveness of the military, to destroy morale, to just make it hard to run an effective fighting machine. When they got Marines running around in high heels so they understand what women go through in life, that shows you there's a problem in the military. And the fact that generals would allow this stuff. Ace Lyons, Admiral Ace Lyons, who unfortunately passed away a while back, he says this. He said, when Obama started gutting the military, and they knew he was doing damage, he said, if the 4 Joint Chiefs of Staff went to Obama and all resigned on the spot, that would have ended his presidency. They could have saved the country at that point, but they didn't. But now you've got generals coming out criticizing President Trump, totally silent through the Obama years, but now they're criticizing the president and siding with the communist insurgents. Now, I'm not saying the whole military is corrupt or any means. The whole FBI isn't corrupt, neither is the CIA, but the leadership of these bodies has been compromised some time ago. I was on a webinar like this with, he was a top Marine general. I think he'd been on the Joint Chiefs of Staff at one time. We were talking about China. And he was very good on saying we've got to counter the Chinese and the military and that. But then somebody asked him about a well-known document that was circulated on Chinese irregular warfare that most of us have read, and they talk about they're using biological weapons, they're using psyops, they're using demoralization, all of this. And somebody asked him if he'd read it. He hadn't even heard of it. So these generals, they can blow up a city for you. They can take out a terrorist base. They're great on the kinetic stuff, but they have no understanding of subversion, even in their own ranks. Even in their own ranks. And this goes right across every government department, every intelligence agency. Our side, their side has China, Russia, Iran, Hollywood, the unions, the media, the universities, the Democratic Party, and we've got the grassroots, very few Republicans and the president. That's the war we're in. That's our side, that's their side.
And then we have the whole matter of, and I've heard very few address this. I haven't heard you speak to this, but I have no doubt that you have deep understanding of it. And that is the whole battle over 5G that a lot of people have little awareness of.
Well, has there ever been a time in history where a technology that can basically identify everything you say or do, has there ever been a time in history where tyrants haven't used such technologies to oppress the population? You think about, say you're in East Germany in 1947. Now, the Stasi had files on everybody, but they're all paper files, right? And you could still scam the system a little bit. You could still hold an underground church meeting if you're really brave. You could still pass around some subversive poems or tell jokes about the leadership or whatever, because it was all paper, and it was sort of like any bureaucracy, it was inefficient to some degree. Well, you imagine a future tyranny with the technology of 5G, especially if it's controlled by the Chinese. Can you imagine the potential? There are Christians in America today who think, yeah, we're heading into for some trouble. We're heading into some tribulation. Things are going to get bad. I might have to go down to 2 cars instead of 3. I might have to hold my church meetings in my own house rather than go to church. Some of my businesses might be affected, but I might not be able to go on as many holidays. It could get really, really bad. Well, you imagine North Korea with 5G technology running the planet. That's more what you're really looking at. That's really what is coming if we are not careful. You're going, oh, well, it doesn't matter. The church can go underground. The church doesn't need to get involved in politics now, because if things get bad, we'll just go underground and we'll keep the faith alive there. We'll have little underground meetings. Yeah, when they can identify your heartbeat from 2 miles away, when they have 5G on every cell phone, 5G all around you, when they have heat-seeking stuff that can tell a live body from 3 miles away, you tell me how you're going to gather 3 people or 4 people or 6 people in a basement for a church meeting without getting raided by the Gestapo, or whoever. The potential for 5G, especially controlled by the Chinese, is just, it's beyond imaginable.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of naivety about it. Like I see the major mobile telephone carriers advertising 5G in such a positive kind of a light. That isn't even really what 5G is. It's not going to be independent, motor. This company has it, and it's going to be, somebody's going to control the whole network, and that's what the battle is over. Huawei, and we're way behind, and that's a whole nother. I don't mean to be asking you such difficult questions.
No, that's fine. But
these are despairing, difficult times, and I think that most people don't have a clue as to the dangerous situation we find ourselves in on many fronts.
No, they don't, and they don't have the understanding of the power that we have to stop this, because large numbers of Christians don't vote. Large numbers don't get involved. Look, if everybody who cared about this country and the Constitution got out and voted wisely, we could turn this country around politically pretty quickly. But so many of us are disengaged and are giving up ground to the left because we don't understand the battle that we're in. We have truth on our side, and we have a lot of numbers. They don't even have as many numbers as us, but they are so much more forceful and so much more organized than we are. And they are totally committed to controlling our lives. We get up in the morning and you might go to church, you might go out fishing, you might go to your business, you take your family out for an outing, you read a book, you watch some TV. We have a lot of things we want to do. The left gets up in the morning as, how can we control everyone else? That's it. That's their life. So who's going to win in a battle between forces like that? That's how Lenin could take over Russia with 2,000 Bolsheviks. That's how most of our public policy around us today, from healthcare to immigration amnesty, to the education system, to religious policy, to business regulation, is all out of the Communist Manifesto. It's all communist. We're swimming in communism, and the only thing that's standing between us and total collapse is American Christians who are fighting the president and the military and the Constitution. And they're all just hanging together by a little thread there.
Yeah, and then they also are dealing with what you talk about us having the numbers, and many of us believe that. And I still, when I look at the map of the United States and the voting fronts, most of the country is red, but it's the
Absolutely.
big population centers that are the blue. My guess will be that despite the fact that Trump is very, very embattled, anybody that's got any sense of common sense is going to still vote for Donald Trump in this day. But then now we're dealing also with a very corrupted voting system, which has got to be another Maoist assault upon us. And
Absolutely.
it's massive. It's going to be massive this time.
Look, and that's why the Democrats are pushing postal voting on everybody, because postal voting is a lot easier to defraud than other methods. And Stalin famously said, "It's not who votes that counts; it's who counts the votes that count." That counts. That's it. It's look. If we had free and fair elections, and we haven't had those for 50 years, if we had total up and down free and fair elections, conservatives would win 90% of them, all around the country, even in a lot of the big urban areas. So we have to obviously take legislative measures to stop that. But in the immediate, this election, see, this is it. This is a civil war we're in now. We got the left, which is communist, and we got the right, which is constitutionalist and Christian and conservative and holds
sleepy.
Those values.
And still very sleepy.
And still very sleepy and still very divided. If we could fly the flag on our side very, very proudly and openly get out there and say what we stand for and label the other side for what it is, the American people, 90% of them would go our way. But that's not the message they're getting. A, our side isn't strong enough, and B, we don't call out the other side nearly enough. They call us white supremacists and racists and Nazis on a regular basis, and we call them liberals and progressives. I am sick of hearing the word liberal. Oh, look at those liberals in Washington. They are not liberal. They are Marxists. They are revolutionaries. They are tyrants. Why do we allow them to lie about us, and we refuse to tell the truth about them? How are we expected to win any kind of moral battle if we don't even label things correctly? Now imagine fighting World War II and you weren't allowed to talk about Nazis.
Yeah, Diana West also wrote a book, The Death of the Grown-Up. And I don't know, did you read that book, or you're aware of that book?
Yeah, I'm aware of it. Yeah, I've read bits of it. Yeah.
The book of it basically, and it's written before the American Betrayal, but it's basically painting a picture of America, going back 15, 20 years, where parents allow their kids to go, out to Florida in spring break and drink and get drunk and mess around and so on. And some of the parents are even accompany them there. It's like, where are parents that are, that's just one little picture. We don't stand up. We aren't training. We aren't giving examples. We're not standing for what right. We're not identifying the difference between the holy and the profane, and we don't see that in our leadership either. And that's what that is one of the things that I think that if that doesn't change, we're gonna just continue. And let's go to this point. We're going to continue to wear our masks, and we're going to bow our knees. And we're going to bow our knees in our churches. We're going to bow the military's going to, as they already are.
Yeah.
This has got to stop. And yet who's going to lead the way at the highest levels to say enough of this already?
Well, that's exactly it. With the right leadership, we would. This is what happened in Germany in the 30s. The German churches who could have stopped Hitler instead took the knee and became Nazi churches. They put swastikas in their churches. We'll be nice to him if he'll leave us alone. That was their attitude. So just going back to the 60s, it's very interesting because, you had the great generation that went through the World War II and the Depression, and they were sick of war and sick of poverty, and they wanted to give their kids a life they had never had. But they went overboard, and they were encouraged by people like Dr. Spock, the communist, who said you should never spank your kids, you should be their friend. You should never discipline or oppress your kids, or, you should be their buddy and let them flower. And that came along right with the Frankfurt School of the 60s, political correctness, the sexual revolution, all of that came out of Marxism, all of it, perfectly timed. And you spoiled a whole generation of kids who are now spoiling their kids, who don't teach them history, don't teach them foundation because they don't know it. They don't teach them moral guidelines. They don't, they're not mum and dad, they're buddies. So you wonder why the kids are running rampant and following Bernie Sanders. But there was another very famous communist who really changed America too, and that was a man called Joseph Fletcher, the man who invented situation ethics. Because there's a book written in '66, Situation Ethics. And, the old system was, the basic moral tenets were laid out in the Ten Commandments. And though a lot of Americans didn't live up to those commandments, they acknowledged that as the standard, right? The morality was fixed. You didn't lie, you didn't steal, you didn't commit adultery. And if you did, well, you knew you were doing wrong. Well, Fletcher came along, a communist, and wrote this book, Situation Ethics, which said, no, that's all old hat. As long as what you're doing is guided by the principles of love, pretty much anything's okay. As long as you do something in a loving spirit. If you steal to feed your family, if you defraud the bank to keep your business afloat because you love your employees, if you're a pastor and you refuse to call your parishioners out for sin because you want to keep your church together, well, that's okay because you're doing it out of love. And you combine all of that with Dr. Spock, with the Frankfurt School, the political correctness that came out in the 60s, you changed the culture of America. And so, of course, the parents are going to let their kids go run wild on spring break, because they were at Woodstock, so why shouldn't they?
This influence has been rampant. Now, as we think of the president, I'm sure there's people around this call that have really picked up their prayers for him, doing what we can to encourage him. I think one of the things that you're saying to us is that this president really needs to hear from America.
He needs to hear from the grassroots.
Before, we need to get some of our large ministries and so on to connect together to get the phone calls coming in or whatever. It's, I think one of the great questions we have is that we've seen this president stand so strongly, and yet here the coronavirus came along. Fauci, as you said, he almost had no choice, it seemed, and he's been back on his heels ever since.
Yeah.
And and you mentioned some of those that surround him. It's still very difficult to imagine that he doesn't have an awareness of how serious the sedition is. Underneath him. He's got Mark Meadows now as a strong Christian man who understands the American people very, very well. Mike Pence is a Christian.
Yeah.
And there's other individuals. How can he not be aware of the
Well, you got Barr coming out and say, look, Antifa is running this. Well, look, Antifa is this much of it. Concentrating on Antifa is like fighting World War II by just going after the Italians and ignoring the Japanese and the Germans. They lack not intelligence mentally. They lack the intelligence networks that should be feeding them the right information. They're flying largely blind. They don't get the information. Trump is just besieged with stuff. I don't know how he keeps it together. So, the fact is he's supposed to digest a deep communist revolution in disparate elements and grasp it when he has got no intelligence briefings on this stuff, when his own CIA and FBI are either flying blind or willfully withholding stuff. When you're in that situation, you've got a problem, and we've got a problem because he's our leader.
And did you hear? This was just recent news. You probably heard. I don't know how soon it broke, but now you've got the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Matt Milley, basically Talk about that. Let people be aware of that too. How
Well,
he distanced himself from doing that walk over to the
yeah,
church.
yeah, yeah. Well, this is just, he should be instantly sacked. Absolutely instantly.
Unbelievable.
And this is, you got to say, Trump had no problem firing people on TV. I'm just wondering why he doesn't carry that on to his current administration. He's sacked a few people, his Secretary of State, etc. But anybody in a time of crisis like this, anybody under his control who publicly embarrasses him like that or countermands an order or undermines his authority should be instantly gone. No question. And he thinks that might play badly on the 5 o'clock news. I'll tell you, it would play very, very well with his support base and a whole bunch of people in the middle. And he needs to understand that.
Americans are longing for justice.
Absolutely.
We're longing for that hammer to fall. Frank Gaffney today on his Secure Freedom Minute on his, on American Family Radio, brought up Phil Haney's name, which basically brought it up and stated, we've been waiting to hear the outcome of all this, and there were those that surmised that he was a suicide, and anybody that knew him, like myself and you, I'm sure, we knew it was no suicide, it was a murder. And so the months are now go by. It was February 21, and it's all strangely quiet, just like it always is.
Look,
And
when do you have a killing like that, and 3 months later you don't even know the cause of death? You don't even know.
Even his family doesn't know.
Yeah, they know nothing. How can that be if there's not political interference there somewhere?
And this stuff is all very damaging, because Las Vegas is another example of a mass killing.
Yeah.
Somehow they never come. There is just so much of that, and this is the stuff I think is killing America from the inside out.
Look, when we see, look, this is pressure from what we see people like Hillary Clinton committing treason and nothing. We see the George Soroses of the world, the deep state people, nothing. And then we see all these people looting and rioting, and some of them get arrested, but you don't see any great crackdown. You don't see any consequences for most of them. The American middle class is going, what the heck? Who's standing up for me? And you're exactly right. The American people are crying out for justice. And if President Trump and Attorney General Barr start dishing it out, he will win in a landslide. But if he keeps dithering on this, you can kiss his presidency goodbye and you can kiss this country goodbye. It's that serious.
We don't have a huge number on this call at all, and I've been noticing that we've had some tremendous, each individual strong like yourself, highly regarded, and we've had a hard time getting over 50, and that doesn't discourage me a great deal because I've been used to it if I went by what seems, I'd have given up a long time ago, and you probably would have as well. I have seen God work and move, and He is our help and our hope. There's no question. Think of Curtis Bowers as another example, a very close friend of yours. We see the hand of God yet in this country, and He works very well through weakness. There's no question about that. But as I just think about what you said, that there have been times where efforts have been made, like I remember Dr. Dobson, when he used to be with Focus on the Family, he's still at Family Talk, just getting the word out. The calls are going in to the White House, over the course of a week, just bombarding he needs the encouragement from the American people, and he needs to have them recognize the longing that we have for him.
Yeah, that I think that's the most critical thing we can do right now. That is, we've got the president who's on our side, we've got the base who wants action, but there's a disconnect somewhere. We need to bridge that divide as much as we possibly can, bypass the deep state, bypass Trump's advisors. It's like Reagan, when he made that famous Mr. Gorbachev tear down that wall speech. All his advisors said, don't do that. That's crazy. Don't do that. And he just said,
yeah,
out of the way, and he gave the speech,
yeah.
right? And this
That's
is
right.
how Trump's ignored his advisors many times in the past, and it's usually worked out well. Well, this is the time to strike out and just go before the American people and lay it out and say, this is what we're going to do, and then start doing it. Not just doing it behind the
Yeah.
scenes, doing it so we can see it being done. You know, when he starts arresting these leaders, I'll tell you what, he might lose a few black votes out of it, but he'll gain, for every one he loses, he'll gain 6.
There's so much at stake right now. We're moving towards closing. You know, you have been a strong voice of truth, marking the liberals, not the communists in the House and the Senate and the highest places. And you've done that so effectively and so well. And you have been that person that we can look to. And I just know that many of us thank you for that, because you're a very courageous man. You know, do you feel in any way that you are, you have an advantage over us, us Americans, because you come out of New Zealand?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you do?
Yeah, well, Frank Gaffney often says that. I can say things that Americans can't say. And having a foreign accent automatically makes you seem a little more intelligent. Well, you know, what's the definition of an expert? Someone comes from more than 50 miles away, right? So, look, but yeah, it is. I think I have an advantage. Yes, and I want to use that to the maximum, you know, not for personal aggrandizement or anything like that, but because I see if I want to save New Zealand, I have to help save America. My country is going to be destroyed just the same as everybody else if we lose this battle. And I got kids, right? And I'm sure everybody on this call has got children or grandchildren. And like, you know, we don't really care that much what happens to us if we're getting on a bit. You know, we've had a good life, and we'll go to our end, you know, with a lot of confidence. But I do this for my kids, right? That's what I do it for. And I'm sure everybody on the call feels the same. We have an absolute obligation to take the greatest country the world has ever seen, with a constitution founded on the Bible, and we have an obligation to nurture that and pass that on to our children. If we don't try to do that, how can we look anybody in the eye again? No.
That is so well said, man. I just appreciate you so much. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you'll join us again. We'd love to have you back.
And I hope to see you again soon, Bill.
Get you back up here to Michigan again.
Yeah, I love Michigan. In the summer, I'm not so keen on the winter, but the summer is just a beautiful state. It's a beautiful place, and there's lots of patriots up there, and I love the place. But you know, we just got to save it all, you know, and I think we can, but we all got to play our role. We've got to be brave. You know, your ancestors fought the British, the world's greatest army, with squirrel rifles, you know, and you fought for years and years and years, losing every single battle. Yeah. And you still won, you know, because George Washington got down and prayed at Valley Forge, you know. There's a spiritual, this nation has spiritual roots. And it will not easily be lost, but we're in peril right now, and we've got to do everything that was within our power to make sure we get through this and go onwards to better things. So I'm happy to play any role I can and use the advantage of my accent. My wife says it's the only reason she married me is my accent, by the way. But yeah, we got to use every gift we have, don't we? You know, good. So let's all do that.
Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to close this in prayer. Thank you so much. We'll have this be our closing, and thank you once again. Lord, we thank you for this time. Again, Lord, we pray for this embattled country. Lord, even as Frank said, it seems like sometimes those that have been born elsewhere and have moved into this country, they see this great country for what it is, and for the history that we have here, the spirit that we have in this country, as Trevor says. And Lord, even as he talks about people in Michigan, and he can say that elsewhere, there are many wonderful people in this country yet. Many great people, many wonderful people. This is for our children and grandchildren. Father, help us to go deeper inside of our souls and recognize the past that we have and recognize the God that we have. And so, Father, we pray, God bless America. Help us to do our part. And we pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Be with us all now as we fight the fight of faith in these days. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Trevor. Give
Thank
a
you.
hug to your
Thanks
wife.
for doing what you do. I
Thank
will.
you.
And thanks for doing what you're doing, Bill. You're a stalwart. So thank you.
Thank you. Bless you. Take care.
Okay. See you later. Bye.
See ya.
Bye, people.